My name is Meg Tuohey. Together we'll gather wisdom from a wide range of voices, thought leaders and seekers just like you. Through individual stories, we'll explore multiple categories of wisdom and uncover how the stripes of our experiences, both joyful and challenging and all that lies in between, intertwine to create a rich tapestry of life. So whether you're looking for inspiration, guidance, or simply a moment of reflection, you're in the right place. This is Wisdom Stripes. Today we are excited to welcome Kim Penberthy to Wisdom Stripes. Kim is a clinical psychologist and a professor in psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences. She has extensively researched altered states of consciousness and the relationship between this and mental health outcomes. Today we are going to dip a toe into her knowledge on after-death communications and the impact these can have on fear, anxiety, and depression. Jennifer, thank you for joining me on Wisdom Stripes, where we are your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers turning pain and confusion into clarity and confidence. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Me too. Now, Kim, we always start with the same question for our guests, and that is, what wisdom would you like a listener to come away with today?
I think the wisdom I would like to have our listeners come away with today is that there is much more in this world than we may know. And my hunch is that the majority of it is benevolent and generous and full of love. And if we open our eyes to that and our flexibility to allow that it can really help us live a much richer, fuller life.
Now, Kim, you are a clinical psychologist. You are a professor in psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia in the School of Medicine. You research altered states of consciousness through meditation. You research in regards to mindfulness, mental health, and well-being. And you have a special interest in after-death communications and that impact on grief and the relationship that has with fear, anxiety, and depression. Could you share with us why you got into this field?
Absolutely. So a lot of the work that I have done in my career as a clinical psychologist is in a medical arena. So that means treating individuals who have clinical diagnoses that include not only psychological issues like depression, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, but also medical conditions. And that includes things like cancer. So I treat a lot of people who are literally facing the prospect of death pretty quickly or in the long term from their illnesses. And this made me very interested in the relationship between these different states of mind and including states of consciousness. And I think we'll get into it a bit more, but I was very aware through my psychological training about the relationship between the mind and body. I tell you though, nothing drives it home like actually working with people who are facing the reality of their body dying and wondering what's going to happen to them, their soul, their essence, their consciousness. And that's where you really learn some interesting things about humans.
So let's take that down another level, because I wonder if there's a practical case study that you can pinpoint as a particularly interesting story in regards to the body dying and the human thinking, what happens to me now? The essence of me that is not my human suit. Could you maybe tell us a story about that?
I think there are, multiple stories, and the story that comes to mind is not only about facing the fear of death and dying, also about grieving the loss of a loved one. And that's where a lot of my research has shifted. And so one incident that comes to mind that's quite recent, and this gentleman has given me permission to share this with others without his name, obviously. I was treating a woman who was dying of cancer. She knew this. It was metastatic cancer, and she was married. And she had some concerns about death and dying. She was Catholic, of a devout Catholic. And in working with her as we approached her death, I saw how much it positively impacted her to have her faith, to have uh, her rituals, to have a very strong trust and belief in what was happening to her and what would happen to her. And this gave her comfort. So she approached this with this sense of purpose and understanding. And I think it was because she was in the state of mind of understanding, having a way to conceptualize what was going to happen to her. Her husband did not have that. They were an older couple. They had a complicated relationship. When she died, he came to me several months later, and he said, "I'm really struggling." He was suffering from grief that had been prolonged. It was hard for him to function, and he was really challenged. And when I agreed to work with him, it turns out that he was not of the same faith. He didn't really have the same belief system, and he was really struggling. When we got down to it, the main issue he was struggling with, and it's just heartbreaking, is that he said, "I know that she's gone and in a better place, as they say. And I know that I loved her with all my heart and soul. But I don't know if she loved me. And now I feel that I will never know. And it's just breaking me." And, that's tough. No wonder he's grieving. This is sort of unresolved. I, at that point, thought, well, I can work with you on sort of trying to come to terms with this, be at peace with this. I can tell you that, yes, he loved you. It didn't help. Finally, we decided that I would teach him some um, meditative state, some contemplative practices that might help him center himself. Um, and he said he would practice those, and he did. He came back to me a couple weeks later, and he said, "I think I'm better." And I was like, "Great." I'm here thinking, "It's my meditations I taught you. Oh, how lovely." And he said, "Well, that's part of it." He said, "What really happened, though, that made a difference was she came back to me. She visited me at night, and it was a very intimate, warm visit." And he said, "I'm not going to go into the details. Those are private." I said, "That's fine." And he said, "I know that she loves me." And it was this, what we call after death communication, this communication that he believed he had had from her, that really he was in an altered state when he perceived this, and it was real to him, and it was reassuring. It was an intimate act of communication of love. And at this point, I didn't care if it was quote unquote real or not. It had a dramatically significant impact on him, on his children that were still surviving, his grandchildren who needed him, his attention, his presence, his mental health. And I have not had to see him since. It literally was that permanent. And I think, as I experienced stories like this, and I keep hearing them, once you are open to them, I think, and I have the just extreme honor to treat these people that trust me with their stories, with their vulnerabilities. And once you're open to them, you begin to hear more of these. And it made me very interested in studying specifically these after-death communications. And so that's what I've done. And so we have now very large databases of 1,000 people internationally telling us these stories, and we're asking for more where we can verify them. And to me, the verification is sort of an added bonus to help with the naysayers who might say, well, this is not really happening. I'm a clinician, and to me, I believe the people that share these stories with me, and I can see the impact on them, and that's what's important to me. I think there is, though, this other large question of what's going on, you know?
So that story was a beautiful and soothing story of a way in which someone's grief was eased because the question he had about his wife and whether she loved him was answered. So his confusion dissipated, his steadiness returned, his connection felt restored, even though she was living in a different plane to him. She's not in the physical with him. She's somewhere else. He still feels like they're connected and they belong. And so his symptoms of fear, anxiety, depression, and grief and worry reduced, and he had a breakthrough or an ease. Now, I love that story. The part of it I'd love to unpack with you some more is the science around how we think that is happening, how he was able to access her, and how we think after death communications occur.
Absolutely. And I think there are a couple of places to go with this. And I think that is an important piece. I think I will start off with clinically. I think it's also important that we normalize some of this. Now, clearly, sometimes people have thought disorders, and that's not what we're talking about here. We, in the research we do, we screen for that. So we're trying as best we can to make sure these are not people who are delusional or have some other kind of thought disorder that needs to be addressed. So when we do that and we look at the data, we see that this is actually quite common if you ask about it. So in fact, there was a Pew Research Center poll from April of 2023 where they asked, now this was, I think, only Americans or North Americans, and they asked if anyone had a communication from a deceased person. And they passed in a lifetime and over the past year. And the numbers are really high. So for the past year, it was 44%. And in the past, their whole lifetime, it was up near 56%. So this is like half of people that were polled endorsed this, which is very high. It's higher than we see in like people having near-death experiences are a fraction of that. People having sort of out-of-body experiences, either from near-death experiences or from, meditation or something. I mean, these unusual experiences that people have, these altered states of consciousness, they're much lower percentage that happen to people. So this is really high. And so educating people about this, what this is, we're on a crusade now trying to educate nurses and doctors because many people feel unsafe or uncomfortable sharing this with their providers, their healthcare providers. And yet it can be a very common thing, and it can be very reassuring and helpful for people. Now, to look at what is actually happening is a very challenging sort of thing. So obviously, it's hard to get people when they're having these. And there is a method that is still sort of being tested called induced after-death communication. Now, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's really sort of a relaxation, meditative type of exercise. In this case, with the induced after-death communication, it does involve something similar to EMDR with the eye movement. And but there's other mindfulness based versions that don't involve that, and so we still have work to do to look at what is the most effective. We do see, however, that these can be induced, and if you think way back to way back American terms, way back to like Raymond Moody, who wrote Life After Life, and he was doing this kind of work with the psychomantiums. If you remember, if any of our listeners read these books, these were strategies. Raymond Moody was a psychiatrist, a student, a medical student initially, and resident at the University of Virginia. And he studied these experiences that people had of communicating with deceased through these practices of sort of staring into reflective pools. This is sort of like a pool of water, a mirror, a crystal ball. That's where this came from. And that under this sort of hypnotic and meditative circumstances, you could connect with the deceased. And so this is not a new idea. And obviously, way before that, throughout humanity, the ancient Greeks, the most indigenous populations had ceremonies and ways of connecting with ancestors. Now, back to the modern days. And so with those methods, we can help do this intentionally. And we now can also look at what is happening in the brain, if it is happening in the brain. So we can compare it to other altered states of consciousness and see, does this look like a meditative state? My hunch is, yes, it will. It would look like some deep contemplative space. Does it look like someone who's having an out-of-body experience? We can do research on that as well. People can induce out-of-body experiences. One of the ways we can do some of this, we're beginning to explore now at my university in my department, is I'm looking at psilocybin to help with prolonged grief specifically. And we're going to be getting functional MRI, so imaging of the brain before and after, and really looking at what does the grieving brain look like in individuals, and then giving them psilocybin, finding out what their experience was. And that's very, very important, because our hypothesis is that that experience, those mystical experiences, they're sometimes called the out-of-body experiences, the sort of experiences where they might have contact with ancestors, they might leave their body, they may see magical things. We hypothesize that that is really an important component, and that is what may influence the grief symptoms afterward. So we also want to look at their brain and the imaging of their brain after they've had their psilocybin. And so we will be able to answer some of that, perhaps, to see what changes, how does it correspond to their unique experiences, and then how does that relate to the change in their symptoms. So I think that is really exciting, to be able to look at that and to see, what really gets me excited is look at the common thread between a lot of these things. Near-death experiences, they have the sort of traditional experience of nearly dying, seeing a bright light, going through a tunnel, often a feeling of intense joy and connectedness, and meeting people there who've passed on, or even a religious figure or some origin, feeling connected. That happens in out-of-body experiences, the sense that I'm more than just my body, that there's something more. It happens with after-death communications, the sense that my loved one is still existing in a different sphere. So, and psychedelics, many of them produce the same thing, and holotropic breathing and deep forms of meditation. So is there this common thread that seems to be a valuable, I should say, characteristic that we all possess as humans? And I think maybe it is.
It certainly seems that way. You know, as you're describing this, I'm sort of seeing the imagery, and I wonder if I can just share with you what I'm seeing and confirm if I'm on the right track for the work that you do. So if I was to think about you and I being in a relationship, and let's make it so that I'm left behind because you have died and I'm grief-stricken. I've lost my friend, I've lost my comrade, I've lost my peer, I've lost my encourager, and I can't find you in the physical anymore. You're not here. Your body has finished its work and your soul has gone to wherever it goes, whatever that is. And I can imagine my grief, my distress, my worry, my longing, and my loss. I can imagine those feelings of the ending that has happened and that I wish hadn't happened. And so it feels like what you're describing is the human capacity to send out a kind of connection, looking for where their person has gone. It's sort of like an arrow on a string. And so they're sending it out via altered states of consciousness, and they're looking to find the remaining print of the person that they used to know in the physical. And when they find that, however they find that, and they're able to have or establish that connection, they're able to establish that connection, what then happens is they start to realize the person is still available and that all is not lost, and that they can access that belongingness. And in doing so, they update their map of the world, and their relationship with that person is not over, but changed. And therefore that relationship is still, they're still connected to that person. So the fear, the anxiety, the depression, the grief, the loss, the worry can dissipate. You might still have the wish that the person was there with you sharing a drink or an after dinner cuddle on the couch or a conversation about work. You could miss the physical, but you still have found them in another way. Do you feel like that is an essential part of healing? Or is it something different in the literature that you're creating?
That is exactly right. And so in the research we've done, we've looked at this for people who report these after-death communications. And you're right, it's more complicated than, oh, I just got all better. Yes, it's like they endorse that it impacted the grieving process. So that's a special way to think about wording. It impacted it. It helped reduce sadness, but not necessarily missing the individual. So it's precisely as you say. It's that now they know, oh, there is a larger connection. There's something bigger here, and that personality, that soul, still exists. And exactly as you said, there's reassurance and comfort in that. And yet I can still miss that I can't come home and sit down at the dining room table and vent about my day with you. I can still do it, but you're not physically here. And so I can still, so it's more nuanced. And that is what we see in the literature. And we see that people change their beliefs in they become more spiritual, they don't endorse becoming more religious. If they were religious, they stay religious. If they were not religious, they stay not religious. What changes is them endorsing spirituality. So this, and we need to dig into that a little more in the literature, because we've not really done a good job of defining what is spirituality. You know, people use this phrase, I'm spiritual but not religious. And what does that mean? So we need to look more into that. whatever that means to individuals, they significantly endorse more of it after. And it may be related to the other things they endorse more of, which include things like they have beliefs that you can communicate with the deceased because, of course, they've experienced it. So they have their own evidence to go by. And they are more connected. They feel actually more connected, which again is one of these complicated findings, that they're more connected in general, also still missing the individual. So it's really, it's very impactful what happens to people when they have these experiences. And yet it's still quite unique and individualized, which I think is going to be the same thing that we find with psilocybin, that I suspect many people will improve on in their grief scores and things like that. And it will be for different reasons, because of their experiences, their own subjective experiences, but they're still sort of in that larger category of the sense of there's something bigger than me. We are still connected. There's still this essence of the person existing, and it's demonstrated to each individually, based on what their unique experience is. Which in medicine we call tailored medicine. Yes.
Right. And if we're
precision medicine.
But isn't that the most important thing? It's the recognition that everybody literally is different, even though we have commonalities. And so the application needs to be tailored to the individual's context, the way that they are built, the way they've been brought up, the things they believe in, the experiences they've had. I really like that it's tailored. I really like that it's not a one-size-fits-all.
I think I agree with you.
Hey there, Meg Tuohey here with a quick and exciting announcement. As a psychologist, coach, and founder of the Wisdom Lab, I've had the privilege of helping thousands of individuals break free from the vicious cycles holding them back and tap into their infinite inner wisdom. If you're tired of feeling unheard, unseen, and stuck in the same old struggles, the Wisdom Lab is the breakthrough you've been yearning for. This on-demand program guides you through a powerful process to shatter emotional barriers, overcome deep-rooted blocks, and experience the profound transformation you deserve. In just 4 hours, you'll gain the tools and insights to revolutionize your life from the inside out. Want to learn more? Click or tap the link in the show notes for all the details. Okay, now back to the episode. All right, I'd like to shift gears slightly, not too far away from what we've been talking about, and just ask you about consciousness. So you are a researcher on altered states of consciousness. And I think maybe what we could do is just a operationalization of what does that actually mean. And we know that there's consciousness, and we know there's subconsciousness, and we know that meditation is a place that we go to access stillness or this God source universe connection. There's probably more than 3 though, and also maybe you could tell us about what the journey or the pathway is.
This is a really complicated question, and I think it's important to recognize that yes, the sort of term of consciousness is very prone to interpretation of the individual. So for me, I am a clinical psychologist. I am a researcher and a clinician. I am not a neuroscientist, although a lot of what I do involves, the neuroscience component. So I will start with that caveat. We have in our division of perceptual studies, many people who we talk about this on a weekly basis. What is consciousness? What is an altered state of consciousness? Because we're also at a hospital and a medical school, obviously, anesthesiologists are going to tell you one thing, you're unconscious or you're conscious, you're knocked out with anesthesia or you're awake, or somewhere in the middle there. But we're looking at really, in my my terminology to look at research, clinical research, so applied research, is looking at humans who do not have thought disorders. So who we typically are looking at people, and that may change over time, but healthy, mentally healthy people, meaning that they don't have a thought disorder, they're not delusional, and then looking at when they alter their consciousness through either meditation, through other spontaneous experiences. What, number one, what are they aware of? What is happening to them? And what is the impact on them? And then also, when we can, looking at what is happening in the brain. And so, for instance, we have had different people who can induce out-of-body experiences, and we will be looking at, well, what is that like for them in their description, and then what's happening in their brain, and what can they access. So all of these components help us describe exactly what are we looking for. I mean, initially, when I first started this research, I would have told you, well, we're looking to see, what happens when you meditate, what happens in your brain. And we've sort of got that, we've had plenty of studies looking at that. And we know that it seems to quiet the brain and allow perhaps access to, we don't know what, to something, what some psychologists call, the universal consciousness. But we're still developing this. So we really don't always know what these altered states of consciousness can be. And I think for now, I feel like one of the best things I can do is find out how many people experience them and what kind of impact they have. As someone who's, like I said, not a neuroscientist and not a sort of a theoretical philosopher, who many of the people that study consciousness sort of look at these theories of consciousness, and there are reams of information on theories of consciousness. So to me, I'm I guess much more pragmatic. I'm always looking for what will help this individual in front of me, what will help this community that's suffering, what will help the planet heal and take care of itself. So to me, I'm hoping some of the answers will come from these altered states of consciousness. And I really define it quite broadly. I will tell you real quickly a story that really startled me in a good way. We had a course at the University of Virginia. These were undergraduate students. Many of the people at UVA are quite bright. So this was a upper class course on meditation. And it was on sort of the historical roots. So, where it came from in Buddhism and ancient, cultures. And then the second class was on modern applications. And then there was a lab where they actually practiced some of these modern applications, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, that sort of thing. And we measured all these variables. So we measured mindfulness, self-compassion, compassion for others, anxiety, trauma. And we looked at, we assessed the participants, the students, before and in the middle and then after the end of the course. And I thought we wouldn't find anything. These were high-functioning individuals taking this course for a religious credit, So they weren't there to improve their mindfulness or become, more compassionate or anything. And yet they did. Their scores significantly improved in just one semester, which in the US is about 3 months. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, they had demonstrated impacts on their compassion to other people, on their compassion to themselves, on their awareness, their intentionality, their mindfulness. So, and their connectedness, their feeling connected. So to me, there is hope for humanity, because if we can do this, we can impact, the world. Mm-hmm. And I have a colleague who just published a paper looking at, she studies out-of-body experiences. And this was a cohort of people who had out-of-body experiences, and she looked at their empathy, so their scores on empathy scales, and they significantly increased after their out-of-body experience. They were more empathic towards others in a significant way, which, in the literature to this point, no one had looked at that. So I think some of these altered states of consciousness, what we're calling altered states of consciousness, are really part of who we are. And if we would allow ourselves to experience them, we feel the true connectedness to each other. And we feel that love and that compassion, and so I just have this thought that keeps coming back to me, that, maybe we are programmed this way. And our modern world, we've just sort of squashed it or ignored it or not nurtured it. Something's going on, though, because this many people experiencing things like this is not just, nothing.
It's not nothing. I wonder if we were to think back over time and think to other civilizations that perhaps weren't as Western as us in terms of looking for that, not so much the collective, the individualistic, but if we went to a different type of society and we thought about the way that they interacted with each other and nature, then particularly when we're thinking about Indigenous societies, we can see that these connections were present and strong and culturally, traditionally handed down. Do you look at groups that traditionally have these stronger connections?
Oh, I would love to have the ability to do that. I have not. I've read about it. There's an excellent book called Alien Down Under that was written, I think, back in the 70s. And it's about, it's an anthropologist who had done a lot of work on behalf of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And she was invited back for an award, and she went into the Aboriginal community. And unbeknownst to her, part of this process was not just giving her an award, it was taking her on a walkabout.
Wow.
And the book is about this walkabout that she did with them. And she describes that she discovered they were able to communicate with each other telepathically. And that this dawned on her over time as she was moving with them through the desert. And she said, they would all know where to stop together, which way to move. They didn't carry any food or anything with them, and yet they would always find food. And she finally asked them one, how does this happen? And well, they said, well, we're talking to each other. And she said, but I don't hear anybody talking. And she said, they said, you don't hear us? And she said, no. And they said, well, it must be because you're hiding something, because their way of communicating was that they said you can read each other's minds if you are open and honest. And it doesn't work if someone's deceitful, which to me makes sense. If you're, that's true even for humans, that it's hard sometimes to read people if they're intentionally trying to deceive you. And anyway, when I read that as a young person, I just remember thinking, well, this makes so much sense that we would have this ability as you know, early humans or human type people who are in great danger of being eaten if we make noise. It seems quite likely that we would have ways of communicating with each other and that we would be in tune and have this. And so what other skills might we have had? You know, maybe, you know, I would love to go back and get another degree in anthropology and archaeology and physics and everything, because I think sprinkled in all of these, you see evidence of this, these other sort of possibilities.
You really do. And another population that I think would be an interesting one to study, and I wonder if you do at DOPS, which is the Department of Perceptual Studies, I wonder if you study neurodivergent humans, because we understand from a neurocomplexity point of view, we can have increased in sensory acuity and perception and different other elements that allow for connections to be made from a sensory point of view, which can be much more heightened than the neurotypical population. I'm curious, is that part of a group that you're interested in?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have not had the ability to do that work yet. I think that's an obvious choice, though, in next steps. You know, we have limited resources, limited personnel, so we sort of churn through what we can. I think the closest we have perhaps to something like that is really looking at people with what we call, you know, unique abilities. And some of them fall in that category of being neurodivergent. However, they're selected for some of our studies because of the specific abilities that they may have. For instance, you know, discharging sort of electrical currents from their body, or sort of what we would call sort of a trance medium. So someone who can get into a trance themselves and sort of do things interesting with their brain to access information. People who can do remote viewing, so leave their bodies and see in other spaces, even very far away. So we do once in a while get unique individuals like that. I think it would be very interesting, though, to look at it more broadly.
Yeah.
So next, I'll put that on the list.
Put it on the list. Well, let's do a little bit in the remote viewing space, because I understand there are a number of documentaries that have remote viewers who used to work for intelligence agencies, particularly in America. I've seen some interviews, who were brought in the early years, in the war years before technology, to be able to go in and gather data to bring back as evidence or information purposes to prepare the other side in terms of that military presence. I wonder if you know much about that.
I don't really, probably about as much as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
I know our government is quite secretive about some of these things, including, you know, unidentified, well, what are they calling them now? Aerial phenomena, unidentified aerial phenomena. So, you know, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist type person. However, in doing this work, I have to say I've seen some extraordinary things, and I really will start with where I began with you, that I do believe that we don't know everything, and that there are components of this existence that we really don't understand yet, and maybe that's okay. I think, though, if we can open our minds a bit more and access some of this in a way that is healing and connects us and helps us understand that we are all interrelated, I think that would be good for humanity. So,
yeah, that is the third time I think I've heard you talk about the good that this work can do for humanity. It feels like connecting humans to each other and nature is a really big motivator for you, or it's a really big reason of the why you do this. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yes, I think because I've had my own experiences, and in ways that really help me trust and feel that that this is something that can be achieved by people, and it may be different for each individual. It hurts me when I see, the people that are struggling and suffering, and often it can be because of this inflexibility in their mindset. And therapy can help with that sometimes. I think for some people, the developmental and biological path that got them there is so entrenched that it would take years and years and years of therapy, and they often don't have that much time. They can't afford that time. So some of these experiences, if we can help people, if we can facilitate them, I have seen the change in people and reduction in their misery, some openness to possibilities, even if it's just this awareness that I don't know everything, that maybe miracles do happen, maybe my soul does exist after this. I just think that being able to provide that education and that opportunity to individuals who can benefit from it is part of my duty as a clinician and as a researcher and an educator.
It feels like we're trying to help people who are stuck in binary thinking, black and white, yes or no, here or not here, to be able to access a greater amount of wisdom through sort of abstract reasoning, this idea that it is more complex, it is more shades of gray, it is more intimately held and expansive than perhaps what they have been able to see, and to be able to have some movement in their thinking that allows them to zoom out and zoom in. And that might help that stuckness that can happen in the concrete, which is a place that all of us can go. And we particularly visit when we are under pressure and we are stressed and we are hurting or grieving or traumatized or sad. And then the unlocking is the opportunity to be able to zoom out, be reconnected to the loss of the loved one and find them in a different way. And then also realize that all is not as simplistic as perhaps we thought it was. There's relief in the detail and the nuance, is what I'm hearing, Kim.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder about you being a professor, and I'm wondering about what that offers for you from a different viewpoint perspective. I can hear the weight, the sort of responsibility of your kind of heart's work, which is in this space to be able to support this and ease the suffering of so many. All the humans go through this experience of loss and grief and worry. And so you are doing the work that might or does allow people to have some relief. I wonder if you can talk to us about any other differences or different viewpoints you might have from where you sit doing this work.
Different viewpoints in what way?
Leadership ways, from a thought leadership perspective, from a lived human experience perspective. Not many people have the wealth of knowledge that you do. And so I imagine for this topic, you can access different ways of understanding the world.
Yes, and I think one of the best things that that I can think of to describe what you're talking about is I really appreciate that I have one foot in what we call, mainstream science, and one foot in this sort of more unusual science. And I built my career initially as a fairly mainstream clinical researcher. So looking at depression specifically, working in psycho-oncology and sort of mainstream development of psychotherapeutic interventions, and then moved into mindfulness-based ones when that was very early on and seemed very weird and strange, which is funny to think about that now. And as I've moved in my career, I think what helps is I can get people to listen to me because they know my history and credibility from early in my career, and they understand that I'm serious in my research and that I do good work. And so one of the things that dawned on me was that for some of this work, if I put out a paper or a book about after-death communications, there's a certain population that would read it. And it's typically people who already know about it or believe in it or have experienced it. The other people may not read it. Scientists, engineers, people who say that looks kooky, So I think it is important to span that through publications, other, podcasts like this one, where people hear from a reputable source about the science of it, as well as some of the extraordinary components of it. And so to that end, I think these sort of podcasts, these media experiences are very important. I think putting information out in areas where the average person can read it, not just an obscure journal on consciousness or something. And to that end, my daughter, who is also a psychologist, she and I wrote a book over the pandemic, and we did exactly that. So we said, let's take what we work with people on about, improving their self-esteem or dealing with their fear of death, and talk about the sort of mainstream psychological research that we know, and then throw in some other things, some personal stories about extraordinary experiences that we or our patients have had, and some of that data. For instance, in the book, we have the final chapter is called "So Long for Now?" ? And it's about death and dying, the fear of death and dying, grief. And we talk about near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and after-death communications, as well as terror management theory and, different more mainstream therapies to help reduce fear. And I think that is really important to communicate that these are happening to humans, and we can study them, and they can have a positive impact as well. So I'm really proud of us for doing that work. We always talked about writing a book together, and it took a pandemic to do it, but we did it.
I love that you did it, and I can feel the service of it for those who have those questions and are looking for those pillars to understand in order to expand from concrete to abstract. That sounds like a really nice journey for them that they could go on with you. Okay, I have a last question for you, and it is around what remains.
All right.
Yeah, what remains unresolved? Where else would you like to go with this? So in your research, what's next? We've sort of heard about all the things that you've done till now, but where are you heading to in these next chapters of your career?
Oh, there's so much. I think many of the things that you brought up very astutely, looking at, different individuals, from neurodivergent individuals to some of the indigenous communities that we do have left and remaining, if they would honor us with that ability. I also would love to explore more the idea and work with these folks who are sort of what we might call geniuses and prodigies, So I've dabbled a little bit in this, looking at working with children who have these abilities that cannot really be explained, and either artistic abilities or musical or mathematical, and that's a bit more rare, we think, although who knows, really. And how does that relate? What is going on there? There's really interesting possibilities. Is that somebody sort of tapping into the global consciousness? Is that someone tapping into information from a past life? I mean, they sound really sort of bizarre and strange, and yet I don't know that there's a better way to explain it. Their brain was loaded with this when they were born. What is that about? So that doesn't seem any more strange than saying that maybe it's the global consciousness access. So there's those areas. So there's a lot of areas that we could move into to look at these experiences. Again, to me, part of why I haven't gone to some of those areas are time and money, and the other thing is I am a clinician at heart, and I really want to be able to take this and say, what do we do with it? I call it the so what question. Something might be really cool and interesting, a theory, and I want to say, well, so what? How do we do something with this that's helpful, that saves our environment or reduces war or helps address mental health or physical health? And so I'm always going to be looking for that piece to pull in and say, oh, good, now we can remind people of this and sort of integrate it. Yeah.
I think that's really a lovely thing. And if I look at other researchers, so I'll use the Gottman Institute, for example, we have decades worth of data from the Love Labs turned into actual clinical interventions and psychoeducation. And that was done by Doctors Julie and John Gottman as a partnership, where he was the researcher and she was the clinical psych who made the data mean something and then built the interventions that then clinicians are trained in, and therefore clients have a different experience of relationship from that perspective. Do you envision a version of that for yourself where you take the data and turn it into interventions?
Oh, I think that's happening. Yes, all the time. So we did a lovely contemplative intervention for people living with lupus. And we got funding to do this, which was super helpful because that patient population, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, is primarily women of color are the people that suffer with lupus. And it is a very waxing and waning and often quite debilitating autoimmune disorder. We took some of the basic sort of contemplative practices from mindfulness-based stress reduction, from different like Vipassana practices, and with the input of focus groups, helped shape it to be something that was culturally acceptable to the individuals we were working with, and tolerable, because many of them had very acute and significant pain. And it was beautiful because we developed this intervention and that was for them, that helped alter consciousness through these contemplative practices. And one of the important pieces for them was to include a partner. So the individual did not go through this intervention alone. They had their partner with them. So this could be literally a partner, spouse, brother, sister, parent, child, friend. And they brought this individual with them. And this was quite important to them for a couple reasons. One, because they often couldn't get there by themselves. And number two, because it was very important for them to have that person understand what they were going through. And we felt the same way. So I think that there are going to be communities where tailored interventions like this can be incredibly helpful. This one was specifically to help address pain and depression and anxiety symptoms, which are often, co-occurring in patients living with lupus. It did significantly address those, which is wonderful. I think, thinking about what are the mechanisms that are helpful in developing these allow you then to take it and tailor it. So we really used generalized components of meditative practices, and yet we tailored it again to the individual or the population out of cultural responsibility and out of a desire for effectiveness. And just, I think it's just much more of a authentic and effective product if you can do that. And many of these people, it's interesting in the psychedelic work, they really talk about the individual trusting their own healthy inner self. And I would also love to explore that a bit more. What are we tapping into in that psychedelic realm when we ask the individual to sort of look inside themselves and find that healthy part? Is that the same thing we're asking for when we induce a meditation in a lupus patient? And maybe there is a component there that's all sort of, again, that string that goes through all of these.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is certainly the basis of my work, which is what I call your wise woman self, that ability to go in. And of course, if you're a different gender, then you have your version of the naming convention I use. But it is that healthy adult, that part of you that is calm and kind and connected and cares about you, that feels into what it is your unique heart print is and your life's purpose and work is, and helps send you impulses in the direction of living a life that matches who you really are. And so then we have the human that sits outside of that or alongside that gets hurt and caught up and distressed and distracted and stuck in some negative loops of grief, confusion, pain, loss, despair, etc. And always within you, though, is that steady self. And the more in which you strengthen that connection to that wise woman, that wise self, the stronger you grow, the straighter and truer you grow. I imagine like a beautiful big tree. And in that ability to live in that connected way, we get to the end of that beautiful life of somebody's, and they look back, as we know that people do, and say, have I lived a life and am I leaving a legacy that I'm proud of? If I look at the life that I've lived and I weigh up both sides of it, do I come out thinking, yes, on the balance, I have left some good behind. I have left an impact, and I have left something that is meaningful to me. And of course, that happens when we are deeply connected to self and living in harmony on the inside and the outside, and that relational balance. So I wholeheartedly agree with you on that, Kim.
Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much.
Yes, I agree. And I would like to say thank you for joining us on Wisdom Stripes, for being part of this really wonderful conversation, and your work on altered states of consciousness. It offers such a unique perspective around treatment protocols that could be developed, the way in which we work with fear and healing and grief and loss. And I guess really on behalf of our listeners and the world, thank you for the work that you do, which is ultimately bringing ease and also the next level of thinking around how in which we can manage the business of being human, which is really tricky and sometimes really painful. So thank you for your work.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I hope you and everyone have a wonderful rest of your day and take care of yourself and take care of each other.
Oh, I agree, Kim. So we hope today's episode has brought you clarity and inspiration to navigate life's challenges with confidence and kindness and that sense of perspective Can I get a different perspective here? Remember, we're here to be your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers, transforming pain and confusion into clarity and strength. If you found this episode helpful, would you mind recommending it to a friend? Until next time, follow me on Meg Tuohey Official on Instagram, and I look forward to chatting with you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wisdom Stripes. Follow me on @MegTuoheyOfficial and leave a comment and review. I'm looking forward to meeting you here next time on Wisdom Stripes.